Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. All right, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I moved into the new apartment about a week ago. It was a small place on the third floor of an old brick building in the city. I liked it because it was quiet, had big windows that let in the morning sun, and the rent was affordable. The walls were painted a soft beige, and there was a simple wooden clock hanging above the bed in the bedroom. The clock was nothing special, just a basic round clock with black numbers and hands. It fit the plain look of the apartment perfectly. At first, everything felt normal. I spent my days unpacking boxes, setting up furniture, and getting used to the neighborhood. The first few nights, I slept well, though I noticed something strange about the clock. Every night, at exactly 3:33 a.m., the clock hands stopped moving. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe the clock battery was dying. But when I changed the battery, the same thing happened again. The clock would run fine all day and most of the night, but as soon as the clock hit 3:33, the second hand would freeze and the minute and hour hand would stop in place. It was like time in that room paused for a moment. It never stayed stopped for long, just for a few minutes, but it was weird enough to catch my attention. I began to notice it every night, even without trying to watch for it. One night, I stayed up later than usual, reading a book on the couch in the living room. The room was dimly lit by the streetlights outside, which threw soft shadows on the walls. Around 3:30 a.m., I started to feel tired, so I decided to head to bed. I set the book down and turned off the light. When I crawled under the covers, the quiet hum of the city outside was the only sound. The apartment was still, except for the ticking of the clock in the bedroom. I looked over at it. The time was 3:32 a.m. I wasn't really thinking about the clock stopping this time. I just wanted to get some sleep. My eyes closed slowly as the ticking filled the room. Then suddenly I woke up. It was like someone had flipped a switch inside my head. My eyes shot open, and I glanced at the clock immediately. The hands were frozen at 3:33 a.m., exactly as they always did. But something was different this time. The room felt colder, heavier, like the air had thickened. I lay there for a few seconds, trying to shake off the strange feeling in my chest. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadow standing over the edge of my bed. It wasn't clear at first, just a dark shape that didn't belong. I didn't see any features, no face or details, just a tall, still figure. My heart pounded hard against my ribs, and my breath caught in my throat. I froze. My mind was screaming for me to move, to scream, to run, but my body stayed still. The shadow didn't move or make a sound. It just stood there as if watching me. Then, very slowly, the clock started ticking again. The second hand jerked forward, then the minute hand moved. The heavy silence was broken by the ticking sound. Slow, steady, normal. And in that moment, I finally screamed. The scream was loud and raw. It tore through the stillness like thunder in the night. The shadow vanished immediately. The room felt warm again, normal again. I scrambled out of bed and turned on the lights. I checked every corner of the room, but there was nothing there. No one. My heart was still racing, my hands shaking. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but no signal. The apartment was like an island, cut off from the world at that moment. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with all the lights on. I kept watching the clock on the wall, waiting for it to stop again, but it never did. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I tried to explain what happened to myself. Maybe it was a nightmare. Maybe I had dozed off just long enough to dream the shadow. But the clock was still a mystery. Why would it stop at 3:33 every night? And why did I wake up exactly at that time? I decided to look into the clock. I took it off the wall and opened the back. There was no trick or hidden mechanism, just a simple battery-powered movement. Nothing that could cause the hands to stop at the same time every night. I even tested the clock in another room, but it ran perfectly. I searched online for anything about clocks stopping at the same time every night. I found some posts where people said clocks sometimes act weird because of faulty batteries or magnets, but nothing about a clock stopping exactly at 3:33 like mine. I checked the apartment's history, looking for anything unusual. The previous tenant moved out suddenly, but no reason was given. The landlord didn't know of any strange problems. Days passed. The clock continued to stop at 3:33 a.m. I stopped looking at it directly, afraid I might see that shadow again. I started sleeping with my phone flashlight on. The room lit up enough to chase away shadows. I convinced myself it was stress from moving or the loneliness of a new place. One night, a few days later, I woke up again at exactly 3:33 a.m. This time, no shadow stood over the bed, but the room felt heavy like before. The clock was still stopped on the wall. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven in the silence. I lay there for a long time, feeling the weight of the quiet. Then I heard it, a faint sound coming from the hallway outside my bedroom door. It was a soft, slow tapping, not a knock or a knock, just a light tap like someone lightly drumming their fingers on wood. It went on for a minute, then stopped. My mind raced, wondering if someone was in the apartment. I got out of bed slowly and moved toward the door. The hallway was dark, the other rooms silent. I opened the door slowly and looked both ways. Nothing. The apartment was empty. The tapping didn't come again. The next morning, I checked the locks on the doors and windows. Everything was secure. I told myself maybe it was the building settling, the old pipes, or a branch tapping on a window. I wanted to believe that to make sense of the sound, but something didn't feel right. I kept thinking about the clock, the fact it stopped at the exact same time every night, and how I always woke up then, like I was being pulled awake. It felt like something was trying to tell me something or make me notice. One weekend, I decided to stay out late and come home after midnight. I walked around the city, trying to clear my head. When I finally returned to the apartment, it was just before 3:30 a.m. I sat on the couch and watched the clock carefully. When it hit 3:33, the hand stopped. I waited, heart pounding, the silence so loud I could hear my own pulse. Then, the ticking started again. But this time, the second hand didn't move smoothly. It jumped backward for a moment, then forward again. The minute hand twitched slightly like a small spasm. It was almost like the clock was struggling to start. Suddenly, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the wall behind the clock. It was slow, almost like nails scraping lightly against wood or plaster. I put my ear to the wall and listened. The scratching stopped. Then, after a few seconds, I heard a soft whisper of movement behind the wall. The quiet shuffle of something moving inside. I pulled the clock off the wall, heart racing, and looked behind it. The wall was solid plaster, but there was a small loose panel where the clock had been. I pushed gently on the panel and it shifted inward, revealing a narrow gap behind the wall. Inside, I saw the edge of small hidden space, dark and dusty. I reached inside and pulled out a thin bundle of old papers, yellowed and brittle with age. They were old letters dating back decades. The handwriting was shaky but careful, full of worries about money, threats from a man, and pleas for help. The last letter mentioned staying quiet and not letting anyone know what happened. I sat back on the floor, papers in hand, feeling a weight lift off my chest. The stopped clock, the tapping, the shadow I thought I saw. Maybe it was all tied to this hidden secret someone wanted to keep buried. I took the letters to the police and the landlord. They said they would investigate. The landlord found out the previous tenant had been a woman who disappeared suddenly, and the apartment was checked by police years ago, but no case was ever solved. Since then, the clock stopped stopping at 3:33. The nights grew quiet again. The tapping never returned. I didn't see the shadow again. I still feel the chill sometimes, remembering how close I was to something dark and hidden. But I learned to trust my instincts and look deeper when something feels off. The clock was never broken. It was just a marker of a secret waiting to be found. And once I found it, the apartment felt like home again. Safe. Real. I'm still living here, now with a new clock on the wall. It ticks steadily, never stopping, always moving forward, just like time should. I found the doll at a flea market on a slow Sunday afternoon. The place was dusty and crowded with old things. Faded books, broken clocks, chipped dishes, and worn-out clothes. I was just wandering around, looking for something to give my apartment a little character. When I saw the doll, it caught my eye immediately. It wasn't a new doll, or even a pretty one. Its clothes were dirty, and its face was cracked in places, like it had been dropped 100 times. The paint on its eyes was faded, but somehow it still looked like it was watching everything. The hair was a tangled mess of what looked like synthetic fibers, and the fabric body was stained and rough. It had an old-fashioned dress on, faded pink with lace frayed at the edges. I don't know why, but something about it felt familiar, like I'd seen it before in some forgotten corner of my childhood. I bought it for a few dollars and carried it home in a small paper bag. When I got inside my apartment, I put the doll on the bookshelf in the living room among some old books and a couple of plants. I didn't think much about it after that. It was just a strange old doll, nothing more. The next morning, I woke up groggy and a little cold from the night. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. When I went to the living room, I noticed the doll wasn't on the bookshelf anymore. At first, I thought maybe I had moved it without thinking, but I was sure I hadn't touched it since I put it there. I looked around, and after a moment, I found it sitting on the armrest of the couch, facing toward the window. I thought it was weird, but shrugged it off. Maybe my cat knocked it over. But then the next morning, it wasn't on the couch. It was on the kitchen counter near the sink, looking as if it had been watching me wash the dishes. I started to feel a little uneasy. The doll had not moved at all since I put it down, and the apartment had no drafts or open windows that could have pushed it around. I didn't want to believe I was imagining things, so I began to pay close attention. Every morning, without fail, the doll was somewhere different. Sometimes it was sitting on my bed, sometimes on the bathroom sink, once on the edge of my computer desk, always positioned as if it was watching something or someone. It was never lying down or thrown over, always sitting upright, facing a certain direction. I checked to make sure no one else had been in my apartment. I live alone and keep the door locked. The windows were all shut tight, and there was no sign of forced entry. My landlord hadn't been by, and none of my friends or family had keys. I even set up a little camera to monitor the doll when I was away for a few hours. The footage showed the doll staying still the entire time. It never moved while I was gone. Despite this, every morning it was somewhere new. I started paying attention to the time of day when it moved. It seemed to happen during the night, hours when I was asleep. But the strange part was I never heard any noise. No footsteps, no scraping on the floor, no thuds or sounds that would explain the doll moving. It was like the doll just appeared in a new place by itself. The unease I felt slowly grew into something deeper. I stopped leaving it in places where it could be a nuisance. I moved it to a corner of the living room where it was out of the way. But the next morning, I would find it somewhere else, sitting on the windowsill, staring out into the street below, or perched on top of the refrigerator. It was never in a spot that made sense. One night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling restless and on edge. It was around 2 a.m. when I felt something cold and hard on my chest. My heart jumped into my throat as I opened my eyes. There, sitting right on top of me, was the doll. Its cracked, faded face was inches from mine, its eyes staring straight at me. Its little hands rested on my chest like it was holding on for balance. I froze. The doll's eyes didn't blink, didn't move. But there was something in the way it looked at me that made my skin crawl. I felt a strange weight on my chest, like a pressure I couldn't explain. My breathing got shallow, and I wanted to push the doll off, but I was too scared to move. My mind raced, trying to understand how it got there. The apartment was locked. I hadn't heard sound. The window was closed. There was no way anyone could have come in without me knowing. Eventually, I managed to sit up slowly, and the doll slipped off my chest and onto the bedspread with a soft thump. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, and threw it across the room into the corner. I lay back down, eyes wide open, heart pounding. The rest of the night was long and restless. I kept looking over at the doll, which now sat motionless in the corner. I couldn't stop thinking about it. How had it moved? Was it possible that somehow, without my noticing, I was moving it in my sleep? I doubted it. I was a deep sleeper and had never had sleepwalking issues. The thought of the doll sitting on my chest, staring at me, wouldn't leave me. The next day, I decided to take a different approach. I wrapped the doll carefully in an old blanket and put it in a box. I taped the box shut and shoved it into the back of my closet. I thought if I didn't see it, maybe the weird feeling would go away. For a while, it seemed to work. The doll didn't show up anywhere. I even started to forget about the strange nights. But then, after a week, I noticed something was wrong. Small things in the apartment began to feel off. I'd leave my keys on the table, only to find them missing the next morning, usually somewhere nearby, but never in the same spot. My phone would be moved to a different room. My clothes on the floor would be rearranged, sometimes folded neatly, sometimes tossed in a different pile. I told myself it was me being forgetful or my cat playing with things. But the cat is old and slow. She wouldn't carry my phone across the room. One night, I woke up to the sound of something scraping lightly against the hardwood floor. I sat up and listened hard. The sound stopped quickly, but my eyes darted around the dark room, trying to find the source. Then I saw it. The doll was no longer in the closet. It sat on the floor by the side of my bed, facing me. I got out of bed, my legs shaking, and picked it up. I could feel the rough fabric, the cold plastic face, and the weight of the doll in my hands. I looked at it carefully, searching for any clues, maybe a string or something that would explain how it had moved. But there was nothing. No wires, no motors, no mechanism of any kind. It was just an old, worn doll. That night, I decided I had to get rid of it. I wrapped it back up in the blanket, put it in a garbage bag, and took it to the dumpster outside my building. I made sure the bag was tightly closed and left it there. I thought that was the end. But the next morning, when I walked into my apartment, I saw it. The doll was sitting on the kitchen table, right where I had left my coffee cup. No one else had a key. No one else had been in the apartment. At this point, I was terrified but also determined not to let this thing take control of me. I packed the doll carefully into a box again and drove out to the edge of town, far from any houses. I walked deep into the woods, far enough that no one would come across the doll. I left the box on the ground and walked away quickly without looking back. I thought that would be the final time. For days, nothing strange happened. The weird feelings eased up, and I finally slept through the night without waking up in fear. I started to relax. But then, one morning, I found the doll on my doorstep, sitting upright, dirty and cracked as always. I never took it inside. I left it on the porch and called a friend to come pick it up. After that, I never saw the doll again. I don't know how it moved or why it kept showing up. I never felt like it was a ghost or anything supernatural. There was no magic, no curse. It was just a doll, but it was also something else, something that shouldn't have been able to move on its own in a locked apartment. I think now it was something more about the way I felt when I saw it, the way it looked like it was watching me, making me aware of being alone in a place where no one else should be. Sometimes I wonder if it was just my mind playing tricks after I bought the doll, or if there was a very simple explanation, maybe a small animal hiding it and moving it around, or even me sleepwalking without knowing it. But the feeling I had the night it sat on my chest, staring at me, there's no simple explanation for that. After all that, I realized some things are just better left alone. Some objects, no matter how small or simple, can hold a strange power. Not magic, not ghosts, but something else. Maybe it's the weight of history, or the way our minds fill in the blanks when something doesn't make sense. Whatever it was, I learned that curiosity can sometimes bring more fear than answers. And sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and never look back. The night we went camping, everything seemed normal at first. We had picked a spot deep in the woods, far from any roads or other campers. It was late spring, and the trees were full of leaves, making the forest thick and dark. The air was cool but not cold, just that sharp smell of pine and damp earth that always makes me feel like I'm somewhere wild and untouched. We arrived just before sunset. There were 4 of us, me and 3 friends I'd known since college. We worked out the tents, set up the camp chairs, and got the fire going. We stacked the wood carefully, making a small, neat pile that caught quickly and gave off a warm orange glow. The fire crackled and popped, and the sound of it mixing with the rustling leaves and distant bird calls was perfect. We didn't say much at first, just enjoyed the quiet and the feeling of being out in the woods away from everything. The sun dipped behind the trees fast, and soon it was dark except for our fire and the small lantern we brought. The forest around us became a wall of shadows, thick and black. Our little campfire was the only thing holding back the dark. We sat close, passing around some snacks and bottles of water. The conversation was easy but quiet, the kind you have when you're tired and just happy to be somewhere peaceful. I kept looking up at the stars that were just starting to show through the gaps in the branches. The sky was clear, no clouds, no wind, just still and calm. Suddenly, the fire went out. It wasn't a small flicker or the fire dying down slowly. It was like someone had reached out and snuffed it instantly. One moment the flames were bright, then the next, only cold black ash and gray smoke floated up. No wind blew. The air was still. The logs just stopped burning. We all sat frozen for a second, blinking and staring at the dark circle where the fire had been. No one said anything. It was strange because there was no reason for it to go out. The logs were dry, the air calm. I reached out and poked the wood, but it was cold. In that sudden darkness, my eyes adjusted slowly, and I caught movement just beyond the edge of the clearing, past the tree line where the shadows were deepest. At first, I thought it was just the way the branches swayed, but then I saw shapes. They were faint and slow, almost like figures shifting in the dark, just out of clear sight. I blinked hard, and when my eyes opened again, they were gone. Just a silent, black forest staring back. My heart started beating a little faster. The feeling of being watched settled over me like a cold weight. I turned to look at my friends, but their faces were tight and serious. No one said anything, but I knew they saw it too. That same tense stillness had dropped over us all. We tried to restart the fire. Matches, lighter, rubbing sticks, nothing worked. It was like the fire didn't want to come back. We sat there with our flashlights on low, casting weak beams around, but the light felt fragile, like it could be swallowed by the dark at any moment. The forest sounds around us seemed louder all of a sudden, twigs snapping, leaves shifting, but I couldn't tell if it was an animal or just the wind playing tricks. Every time I glanced toward the tree line, I thought I saw shapes moving again, just barely visible like shadows stretching in the corner of my eye. The night grew colder. Without the fire, the warmth vanished, and the forest felt endless. I tried to focus on the soft breathing of my friends nearby, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me, a tight knot in my stomach. Hours passed. We stayed close together, huddled in our camp chairs, shining flashlights into the dark trees every few minutes. No one wanted to move far from the clearing, afraid of what might be out there. We didn't speak much. Words felt useless. At one point, I looked around the circle where we'd been sitting by the fire. The ground was disturbed. Footprints, some of them large and heavy, pressed deep into the dirt just beyond the fire ring. They weren't animal prints, not deer or bear, but something else. The size and shape were wrong, too big and uneven. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. I didn't say anything, but I knew my friend saw them too. We all stared at those prints for a long time, trying to figure out where they came from, but the dark forest swallowed all the answers. When the first light of dawn finally crept through the trees, we packed up quickly and left. None of us said much on the way back to the car, but the silence was heavy with the memory of that night. We never saw the shapes again, but the feeling stayed with me long after. The weight of being watched, the strange footprints, and the fire that died without a reason. That night taught me something about the woods. It's not just about the animals or the weather. Sometimes there's something else there, something silent, patient, and always watching, waiting just beyond the tree line. The abandoned building sat on the edge of town, a broken shell of brick and rusted metal, with shattered windows that looked like blind eyes staring out at nothing. I had passed it dozens of times, usually on my way home from work or just out driving around when I needed to clear my head. The place had a bad reputation, mostly from older stories about the factory that used to run there years ago before it shut down suddenly. People said it was unsafe, full of unstable floors and sharp debris, but I was curious more than anything. I wanted to see it for myself. One afternoon, just before sunset, I finally decided to go inside. The air was cool and dry, and the late spring breeze carried a faint smell of wet concrete and rust. The front door was hanging off its hinges, barely attached, but it gave way easily when I pushed it. Stepping inside, the light dimmed instantly. The whole place smelled like dust and old sweat, mixed with something I couldn't place, a sour metallic odor that made the back of my throat tighten. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the thick darkness. The floor beneath me creaked with every step, and the walls were covered with peeling paint and graffiti. I moved slowly, trying to keep quiet, not because I thought someone might be there, but because the whole building felt like it was holding its breath. There was a strange silence, apart from the distant sound of a dripping pipe somewhere far away. As I walked deeper inside, my light caught something on the far wall, a set of numbers written in bright red paint. At first, I thought it was just graffiti, but the way the numbers were spaced and the dripping paint made it look deliberate. It was a phone number. I stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at it. It seemed too strange, too deliberate to ignore. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the call button. The numbers were old, messy, but clear enough to dial. Curiosity won over caution. I pressed call. The phone rang twice, then the line went dead for a moment. Just as I was about to hang up, a voice came through the speaker. It was low, almost a whisper, but clear enough to make my heart jump. "I see you." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My hands trembled, and the phone slipped from my fingers, hitting the cracked concrete floor with a harsh clatter. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, breath catching in my throat, the beam from my flashlight bouncing wildly as I fled toward the exit. But even as I sprinted, I heard it soft, almost too quiet to believe. The same voice coming through the caller ID on my phone, which was still lighting up in my pocket. "I see you." I ripped the phone out and tried to shut it off. Nothing. The screen stayed on, the voice continuing to whisper from the speaker, growing more intense, but never changing words. I yanked the battery out, but the voice didn't stop. I realized with a sinking feeling that the sound wasn't coming from my phone anymore. It was coming from inside my head. For hours after that, the voice stayed with me. Every quiet moment, every second I tried to think or sleep, I heard it whispering, "I see you." I stopped going outside. I stopped answering calls. I even stopped looking at my phone. The next day, I went back to the abandoned building with a friend, hoping to prove to myself it was just a prank or some kind of weird recording. But the phone number was gone. The red paint had been scrubbed away or covered up. There was no sign it had ever been there. I tried to explain it to people, but no one believed me. Some thought I was messing with them. Others said I was stressed or imagining things. But I knew what I heard was real. Something had seen me in that building. Something had reached through the phone line to get to me. Days turned into weeks. The voice didn't stop. It was always there, just beneath the surface, always watching, always reminding me. It wasn't a ghost or a fantasy. It was something very real, and I couldn't escape it. So I did the only thing I could. I erased all my contacts, destroyed my phone, and moved to a new town. I started fresh with a new number and a new routine, staying away from anything old or abandoned. The voice never came back, not once. But every time I'm alone and hear a faint whisper on the wind, I wonder if it's still watching, waiting, because I learned something that day in that building. Some things you don't want to see, and some things don't want to be forgotten. After breaking up with my ex, my life felt like it had been shoved into a blender and turned on high. The quiet after the storm was worse than the fight itself. At first, I thought the worst part was the loneliness or the way my mind kept replaying every stupid thing I said, every moment I could have fixed but didn't. But it wasn't just the silence I had to deal with, it was the phone. It started about 2 days after the breakup. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. I answered, thinking maybe it was someone checking in on me or a wrong number. When I picked up, all I could hear was breathing. Heavy, slow, and uneven breathing. I thought maybe someone had dialed by mistake or was messing with me. I said hello, but no one spoke. Just that breathing. Then faint sobbing. It was soft, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. I hung up quickly, shaking off a chill that wasn't there before. The calls didn't stop. Every few hours, the phone rang, always from an unknown number. Sometimes it was breathing, sometimes the soft sobbing, sometimes just silence. At first, I thought it was a prank or some glitch with my phone. I checked the device thoroughly. No viruses, no apps acting strange. Nothing unusual in the settings or the call logs. But the calls kept coming. Every time, the same thing, breathing, sobbing, silence. I started to dread my phone. I put it on silent, left it in another room, even considered turning it off completely, but it felt like the calls were following me. I would glance at it every few minutes, my heart skipping when I saw the screen light up with an unknown number. One night, after about a week of this, I was lying in bed trying to sleep. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. My phone rang. I tried not to answer. I told myself it was nothing, just someone messing around. But the ringing was persistent. Finally, I grabbed the phone. It felt cold in my hand, heavier than usual. I looked at the screen, unknown number. I answered. This time, something was different. There was a whisper. It was soft, hesitant at first, then clearer. It was my voice, but it wasn't me talking. It was my voice, whispering things I had never told anyone. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was just tired or losing my mind. But the whispers kept coming, revealing secrets I had buried deep, thoughts and feelings I hadn't even admitted to myself. I heard myself talk about fears I never shared, moments of pain I locked away, things I was ashamed of. I could hear my own voice confessing secrets I didn't even remember holding on to. The whispers didn't feel like a voice coming from outside. It was as if the phone was channeling my own mind, whispering back my darkest thoughts. I was terrified. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and cracked, but the ringing didn't stop. The cracked screen lit up again, glowing in the dark like some strange beacon. I looked at it, heart pounding. The whisper came again, louder this time, closer, like it was right next to my ear. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to answer the calls anymore, but somehow I felt pulled in, like the phone was holding something important for me, something I needed to hear, even if it scared me. I started to record the calls, trying to catch what exactly was being said. While I played back the recordings during the day, I only heard static and occasional faint breathing. No whispers. It was like the voice only appeared when I answered in the dark, alone. Days passed. I tried to live normally, but the calls became more frequent. I stopped leaving my phone out. I hid it in a drawer, left it at work, anything to avoid hearing the voice. But somehow, the phone found its way back to me every night, ringing at the same time, 2:13 a.m. I researched everything I could about phones, calls, stalkers, anything. Nothing explained what I was going through. No record of calls from an unknown number, no app or virus to blame. My phone's call log showed no incoming calls at all. It was like the calls were invisible, only I could hear them. Then, one night, something changed. The voice wasn't just whispering secrets anymore. It started to talk about things happening right then. Things in my apartment I hadn't moved or touched, sounds I didn't hear, shadows shifting in the corner of the room. It described the way I felt when I heard the phone ring, how my pulse jumped, how my hands trembled. It was like the voice knew me better than I knew myself. The whispers stopped being random secrets and became detailed observations. They told me about my daily routine, the small habits I never noticed about myself, like how I always cracked my knuckles when I was nervous or how I avoided looking at certain parts of my apartment. I felt watched, like something was inside me or around me, using my phone to speak. I stopped answering the calls completely. I put the phone in a locked box, buried it under clothes, and left it off for days. But at night, my phone would ring anyway, and I could hear the whispers faintly through the walls. It was as if the voice had escaped the phone. I started sleeping with the lights on. I didn't want to close my eyes because the whispers were louder when it was dark. Sometimes I could hear my own breathing in the silence, and it sounded wrong, like I was someone else. One night, I had a moment of panic and took the phone apart. I wanted to find something inside, a bug, a recording device, anything. But it was just a phone, nothing out of the ordinary. No extra chips, no strange wires. It hit me then. It wasn't the phone. It was me. I was losing myself in the breakup. My mind was breaking down, twisting my own thoughts and fears into something I couldn't control. The calls, the whispers, they were a product of my own anxiety and pain, my brain trying to cope in the only way it knew. I was calling myself. I was the unknown number. I was the breath and sobbing, the whispered secrets. It explained why no one else could hear it, why recordings were silent, why the phone showed no incoming calls. It was a mental loop I was trapped in. It was terrifying to realize that the enemy wasn't outside, it was inside me. But this realization also gave me something to hold on to. It was a terrible truth, but it meant I could fight it. I sought help. I talked to a therapist about the breakup, about the calls, the whispers. I told her everything, even the things I was afraid to admit to myself. Step by step, with her help, I started to untangle my thoughts from the noise in my head. The phone stopped ringing at 2:13 a.m. The whispers faded until they disappeared completely. I learned to manage the anxiety and the memories I thought I had lost control over. It took time, more than I ever thought it would. But eventually, I got to a place where my own voice was just my own voice again, quiet, normal, and mine. And the phone? I never answered those unknown calls again. I turned it off every night and kept it far away from my bed. Because some battles aren't fought outside. Sometimes the scariest fight is inside your own mind. But it's a fight you can win. I stepped into the elevator late at night, the building eerily silent except for the soft hum of the elevator machinery. I was alone, carrying nothing but a small bag, heading down from the office after finishing some last-minute work. The building was mostly empty at this hour, with security rounds being the only sign of life. I pressed the button for the lobby, and the door slid shut behind me with a quiet ding. The elevator started moving down, the floor numbers lighting up above the door, one by one, to 9-8. But suddenly it stopped. The number on the panel blinked oddly. It wasn't any floor I'd seen before. The number was something strange, like a letter mixed with a number, B7. I thought it might be a maintenance level or a basement area I didn't know about. The elevator made a faint mechanical noise, and then the door slid open. I glanced outside and was hit by an unusual stillness. The hallway was pitch black, except for the faint glow of emergency exit signs spaced far apart along the walls. No lights flickered overhead. It looked completely deserted. I should have stopped right there and pressed the close button, but something made me step out. Curiosity, maybe, or just the hope that the doors would close and I'd be back on my way in seconds. The floor was oddly cold under my shoes, the kind of cold that felt like the air had been trapped there for hours. The walls were painted an off-white color, peeling slightly at the edges, with long shadows stretching down the hall from the exit signs. I could see no doors along the walls, no rooms, nothing that suggested it was part of the building I knew. Just a long, empty corridor stretching off into the darkness. I took a few steps forward, the sound of my shoes echoing faintly, sharp and unnatural in the still air. The smell was different, too, stale, like the building had been closed off for months. My heart began to beat a little faster. The elevator doors stayed open behind me, inviting me back in, but I felt a pull forward instead. I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a faint tapping like footsteps, but heavier and quicker. They weren't coming from behind me. They were coming down the hallway toward me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps grew louder, faster, pounding closer like someone was running. My body tensed, every instinct screaming at me to turn and sprint back into the elevator. Before I could move, the elevator doors slammed shut with a hard thud. The sound echoed through the dark hallway, a solid finality that left me trapped out there. I stood frozen, heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might burst through my chest. The footsteps continued, closer now, the quick taps almost like a rhythmic pounding on the hard floor. I scanned the dark hallway, but I saw nothing. No shapes, no shadows, no signs of anyone. Just the dull red glow of the emergency exit signs flickering weakly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The footsteps stopped suddenly, leaving only my ragged breathing and the low buzz of the emergency lights. I took a careful step forward, my hand reaching out to touch the wall. It felt cold and rough beneath my fingertips, coated in a thin layer of dust. I tried the elevator call button on the wall, but nothing happened. No lights, no ding. Just dead silence. Panic started to creep in. I was alone, trapped in a dark, strange corridor on a floor that wasn't supposed to exist. I tried to remember the layout of the building, the security maps I'd seen during orientation, but nothing matched this place. There were no windows, no doors to offices or stairwells, nothing but that endless dark hallway. I forced myself to walk forward, hoping to find a staircase or an exit. Each step felt heavier, the silence pressing against me like a weight. My phone was in my bag, but no signal. The building's thick concrete walls swallowed any chance of a call for help. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a door at the far end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim red light. I hurried toward it, relief washing over me as I reached for the handle. The door was locked. I pressed my ear against it, hoping to hear movement on the other side, footsteps, voices, anything. But there was only silence. My heart sank. I looked back down the hallway. The elevator doors were still closed, the panel flashing that strange B7 number. The only sound was the faint hum of the emergency lights. I leaned against the door, breath trembling. Time lost meaning. Minutes dragged on like hours. Suddenly, from somewhere far down the hall, I heard the footsteps again. Slow this time, deliberate. I didn't dare turn around. The footsteps stopped, right behind me. My skin prickled. I forced myself to turn, but there was nothing there. No one. I didn't wait to find out what else might be lurking. I shoved the locked door with all my strength, hoping for a weak latch or broken lock, but it didn't budge. Then I heard the faintest sound of a key turning in a lock behind me. I whipped around, searching for any sign of a person or movement. The hallway remained empty. Suddenly, the door I was leaning on clicked and the handle turned. The door swung open slowly, revealing a dimly lit stairwell, emergency lights buzzing overhead. Without hesitation, I stepped inside, slammed the door shut behind me, and ran up the stairs as fast as I could. Each step echoed off the concrete walls as I ascended, my breath short and quick. After a long climb, I burst through a door that led back to the familiar fluorescent lit maintenance floor I knew from before. My legs shook, but I didn't stop. I found the nearest stairwell and rushed down, finally reaching the lobby. The front doors were locked, so I hit the emergency exit button and the doors clicked open. I stepped outside into the cold night air, heart still pounding, but safe at last. Later, when I told security about the strange elevator stop in the dark hallway, they looked at me like I was crazy. The building blueprints didn't show any B7 floor, no extra hallways or doors like I described. They suggested maybe the elevator malfunctioned, or I had imagined the whole thing, stressed after a long day. But I know what I saw, and I'll never take that elevator alone again. I was alone in the office late at night, working on a project that had a tight deadline. The building was mostly empty by this time, just me and maybe a couple of night shift janitors scattered across the floors. My desk was near a large window that faced the parking lot outside. The hum of the fluorescent lights was steady, and the only other sound was the occasional tapping of my keyboard. The clock on the wall showed it was just past midnight. I had been typing for hours, eyes tired and body aching, but I wanted to finish as much as I could before leaving. The office was quiet, peaceful in a way, but also a little unnerving because it was so empty. Sometimes the silence felt too heavy, like it was waiting for something to happen. I glanced up from my screen to stretch my neck. The window was dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I thought I saw something move just out of the corner of my eye. It was a quick movement, like a shadow slipping past. I blinked and shook my head, thinking maybe it was just a trick of the light. Then, without warning, I saw a face pressed right up against the glass. It was close, so close I could see the skin pulling tight, the shape of a nose and a mouth. But something about it was wrong. There were no eyes. Instead, where the eyes should have been, there were two deep black holes, empty dark like nothing was there at all. The face wasn't pale or glowing. It was the same color as someone who'd been outside in the cold, but it wasn't human. It didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at me through those hollow sockets. I froze. My heart jumped and thudded in my chest. My breathing became shallow. I stared back, unable to look away but wanting to. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, I blinked. When my eyes opened again, the face was gone. The window was empty, just the dark parking lot outside. I sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Maybe it was someone playing a prank. But who would be outside here this late at an office building with security cameras everywhere? And if it was a person, why no eyes? I grabbed my phone and called security. The line rang. Then a tired voice answered, sounding like they had been woken from a nap. I told them what I saw, the face pressed against the window, the empty eye sockets, everything. They told me they'd check around the building, but when they came back a few minutes later, they said no one was around. No footprints, no cars, no signs of anyone outside the window. I asked if the cameras showed anything. They said they'd look and get back to me. I sat back down, heart still racing. I tried to focus on my work again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time I looked at the window, I half expected the face to be there again. Minutes passed, and I kept glancing outside. The parking lot was empty. The streetlights flickered slightly. The wind picked up a bit, making the trees outside rustle and casting shadows that moved on the walls inside. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, stress from working late, tired eyes playing tricks. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from security. They had checked the cameras and didn't see anyone near my window at all. The footage showed the empty parking lot, nothing unusual. But the weird thing was the camera right outside my office window seemed to cut out for a few seconds during the time I said I saw the face. I frowned. How could the camera just stop working for a few seconds like that? I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I decided to call the building maintenance to report the camera issue. Maybe it was just a technical glitch. But when I asked if anyone had been near my window during that time, they said no. The night janitor had been on the other side of the building, and the security guards were all accounted for inside the building. I sat back down again, feeling tired and confused. I tried to convince myself to stay calm and keep working, but I was jumpy now. Every sound, the creak of the building settling, the distant hum of the air conditioning, felt amplified. My eyes kept drifting to the window, half expecting to see those hollow eyes staring back. Then I noticed something else. There were faint smudges on the glass, right where the face had pressed against it. It looked like someone had put their hand flat on the window. The marks were faint, but definitely there. I wiped at the glass with my sleeve, but the smudges didn't come off. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the dark parking lot. The lot was empty except for a few cars parked far away, near the main entrance. The trees were swaying in the breeze. No one was there. The building was quiet. I touched the glass where the smudges were, my skin cold against it. I wondered if someone had actually been out there, maybe someone with some kind of illness or injury that made their eyes look like empty holes. But no matter how I thought about it, it didn't add up. The face had been too still, too unnatural. I sat back down and turned on the bright overhead light to shake the darkness away. The harsh white light filled the office, making shadows sharp and defined. But the light also made the window look like a mirror. I saw my own tired face reflected in the glass, eyes wide and blinking rapidly. I kept working, trying to focus on the report I had to finish by morning. My hands felt cold, and my mind kept wandering back to that face. What had I really seen? Was it some kind of prank or a sick joke? Was it a person with a terrible injury, or was my mind playing tricks after too many hours awake? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. I decided to pack up my things and leave as soon as I finished this last section. I didn't want to be alone here anymore. As I stood to grab my bag, I noticed movement outside again. I looked up, heart pounding, but it was just a raccoon darting across the parking lot. I laughed nervously at myself for getting so scared over something so normal. I turned back to my desk, ready to finish up. Then something caught my eye. A shadow was moving quickly past the window's edge. I blinked and it was gone. I shook my head and told myself to get out of here. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. The hallway was empty and cold. As I walked past the security desk, I saw the guard watching the camera screens. I asked if he had seen anything strange. He shook his head, said it was just a normal quiet night. I thanked him and hurried out to my car. The night air was cold and fresh. I locked the car doors and started the engine. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw a dark shape standing across the lot, just beyond the edge of the lights. I blinked and it was gone. The next day, I reported everything to the building manager. They reviewed all the security footage again and checked the cameras thoroughly. They found no one had been near my window and no signs of forced entry or tampering. The camera that cut out was never explained. Maintenance said it might have been a glitch, but couldn't be sure. I asked around, and no one else had seen anything strange. The janitors, the guards, other employees, all said the building was quiet and normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me that night. After that, I asked to be moved to an office without windows. I never saw the face again, but sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone and the lights are low, I still think about those empty eye sockets staring back at me. It wasn't a ghost or a monster from Story. It was something real, something human maybe or not. Something that didn't belong outside my window. And that's what scares me the most. Walking home at night was something I had done hundreds of times before without any trouble. The streets were usually quiet after dark, the only sounds being the soft rustling of leaves in the wind or the distant hum of a car passing by once in a while. It was a short walk from the bus stop to my apartment, just a few blocks through a neighborhood with dim streetlights and mostly empty sidewalks. I always felt safe enough, knowing most of the houses were occupied and that I could be home in just 5 or 10 minutes. That night, the air was colder than usual. The wind was sharper, cutting through my jacket and making me pull the collar up around my neck. The streetlights flickered sometimes, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. I had my headphones in listening to podcasts, but I kept the volume low so I could hear what was going on around me. The usual calm feeling was there at first, but something changed as I walked. I started to notice a shadow that seemed to move exactly as I did. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe a trick of the light or some tree branches shaking. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. The shadow matched every step I took. Every time I turned my head, it stayed in the same spot behind me, perfectly synced. I stopped walking and turned around quickly, hoping to catch whoever or whatever was there. While I faced the shadow directly, it froze. It didn't move a muscle, just stood there still. The shape was tall and thin, but I couldn't make out any real features. It wasn't a person stepping out of the dark, it was just that dark shape. The streetlight above flickered again, but the shadow didn't change or blur. It just stayed exactly where it was, watching me. I could feel my heart pounding hard against my chest, like it was trying to break free. I started to run. My footsteps echoed loudly on the pavement as I sprinted toward my apartment. I didn't look back this time. The shadow stayed behind me, moving forward slowly but surely. I could feel it there, almost like a heavy weight pressing on my back. When I reached the door of my building, my hand was shaking so badly, I fumbled with the keys. Finally, I managed to unlock it and slam the door behind me. Inside the dimly lit hallway, I quickly locked every door I could find. Front door, back door, even the windows near the ground floor. I checked each lock twice. Then I pressed my back against the wall, breathing hard, trying to calm down. But even inside, I could feel the shadow outside. It was standing still on the other side of the glass, just watching. No movement, no sound, just a dark shape waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, eyes glued to the street below. The shadow never left. It stayed outside for hours until the first rays of sunlight started to break through the darkness. When morning came, the shadow disappeared. Over the next few days, I avoided going out after dark. I told myself it was just some stranger who wanted to scare me, but nothing happened again. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, something that didn't want me to be safe. A week later, I found out from a neighbor that a man had been seen lurking in the area around the same time. The police said he was connected to a series of break-ins nearby. No one knew where he had gone after that night, but it made sense why the shadow had followed me. someone watching, waiting for the right moment. After that, I always made sure to walk with others if I had to go out at night. And every time I heard a strange sound or saw a shadow close behind me, I didn't hesitate to run straight home, lock the doors, and keep watch until daylight came again. The shadow wasn't a ghost or a trick, it was a real danger, and I knew better than to let it catch me. Moving into the old apartment was supposed to be a fresh start for me. After months of searching, I finally found a place that was affordable enough to rent on my own, tucked away in a quiet older part of the city. The building itself looked like it hadn't been touched for decades. Cracked paint on the walls, creaky wooden floors, and that stale, musty smell that old places have. The landlord warned me it was an old building with character, but nothing about it being unsafe. The rent was low, and the location was convenient, so I signed the lease without hesitation. When I first stepped inside the apartment, it felt strange but oddly comfortable. The ceiling was high, and there were big windows that let in sunlight during the day. The walls had faded wallpaper with a pattern I couldn't quite place, peeling a little at the edges. The kitchen was small, with old cabinets and a sink that had some rust around the edges. The bathroom was tiny but functional. There was some dust and dirt left from previous tenants, but nothing a good cleaning wouldn't fix. The first few days passed quietly. I was busy unpacking and getting things organized. One evening, while I was hanging some pictures on the wall in the living room, I noticed a slight bulge behind one section of the wall near the corner. It looked like the wallpaper was uneven and the wall felt different when I pushed against it. Curious, I grabbed a screwdriver and gently pried at the baseboard. Underneath was a narrow panel, almost like a door, but hidden behind the wall. It took some effort, but I managed to open the panel. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, maybe 2 feet wide and 5 feet deep, hidden from plain sight. The air inside smelled stale and dry, like a forgotten attic. There was a thin layer of dust on everything, and the walls inside were rough, with old cracked plaster. At the back of the crawl space, there was an old wooden door, very worn and covered in scratches and marks. The door had a rusty latch, but no lock. I hesitated, but pushed it open. Inside was a small, windowless room, probably no bigger than 8 by 10 feet. The floor was covered in thick dust, and everything inside looked frozen in time. Scattered around were old toys, wooden soldiers with chipped paint, porcelain dolls with cracked faces, and a few stuffed animals that had faded colors and stuffing poking out. On the far wall, yellowed photographs were taped in an uneven row. They were all black and white, worn at the edges, and showed groups of children smiling at the camera. None of them looked familiar. Their clothing seemed from the 1950s or earlier. I felt a chill run down my spine, but it was mostly from surprise and confusion. Who had these children been? Why was this room hidden? And why had no one mentioned it when I rented the place? I closed the door and secured the panel again, planning to ask the landlord about it the next day. When I saw him, I asked casually if he knew anything about the hidden room. He froze for a second, looked me in the eye, then said, "There's some old storage space behind that wall, probably left over from the building's original design. Nothing important, just junk. No one has been in there for years." That was it. No mention of the toys or photos. I pressed no further. That night, I went to bed as usual, but as the apartment grew quiet, I began to notice something strange. Faint noises coming from the direction of the hidden room. At first, I thought it was the building settling. Old buildings make noises like that all the time. But the sounds were different. They were light, rhythmic, laughter. Children laughing softly, followed by footsteps that sounded like little feet padding on wood. I stayed still in bed, straining to listen. The laughter faded after a few minutes, replaced by silence. I told myself it was my imagination, maybe some distant noise from outside or echoes from the hallway. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was coming from a wall. Over the next week, the sounds became more frequent. Sometimes it was laughter, sometimes the soft patter of footsteps moving back and forth. Other times, I heard the faint jingle of metal, like tiny bells or a rattle toy being shaken. I checked the hidden panel every time, but the door was always closed and locked with a rusty latch. One night, I decided to stay awake and listen. I sat quietly in the living room, with my ear pressed to the wall near the hidden room. Around midnight, the sound started again. The laughter was clearer this time, happy and light, but not playful, more like a recording playing over and over. The footsteps came and went in a slow pattern, almost like someone was pacing. I checked my phone and the clock. I wasn't dreaming or imagining it. I called the landlord again the next day, asking if any previous tenants had ever mentioned strange noises. He looked uneasy and told me no one had complained, but added that the building had a history. Years ago, it used to be a small private orphanage. I was stunned. An orphanage? In this building? He explained that back in the early 1900s, the building had housed children who were left without families, cared for by a small group of caretakers, but had closed suddenly after some financial trouble. No one had lived there since then until it was converted into apartments decades later. This explained the children's photos and toys. But why the noises? I thought maybe the old pipes or the building's creaky structure were causing sounds that just happened to sound like children. Still, it was unsettling. I started spending more time near the hidden room during the day, examining the photos and toys more closely. The photographs showed kids with names scribbled faintly on the back, but the handwriting was smudged or faded. The toys were all carefully placed. None were broken or scattered like they had been tossed in a hurry. It felt like someone had arranged them with care. One afternoon, I found an old notebook behind some boxes in the crawl space. It was a journal from one of the caretakers dated back to the 1930s. The entries were brief but revealing. The caretaker wrote about the children's daily lives, the struggles they faced, and how the orphanage had tried to keep things normal despite the hardships. But one entry caught my eye. It mentioned a quiet room, where some children were sent to be alone when they misbehaved or when caretakers needed a moment without disturbance. The tone was clinical, almost cold, describing the room as small, with a locked door, and nothing inside except a few old toys to keep the children company. The journal hinted that some children were kept in the quiet room for hours or even days, sometimes as punishment. The caretaker wrote that it was necessary for order, but also mentioned that the children would cry and beg to be let out. I sat back, feeling the weight of those words. The hidden room was that quiet room. The more I learned, the heavier the atmosphere in the apartment felt. At night, the laughter and footsteps persisted. It wasn't friendly laughter. It sounded empty, like echoes of past moments repeating themselves in the silence. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the hidden room, unlocked the door, and stood inside. The air was thick with dust and old memories. The toys looked worn but carefully placed. I ran my fingers along the wall, imagining the small bodies that had once been trapped here, waiting and hoping for freedom. I realized the sounds I heard were not ghosts or spirits, but likely old pipes, the building's creaking, and maybe even rats or small animals in the walls. My mind had turned the noises into laughter and footsteps, filling the empty space with echoes of what once was. Still, the weight of the history was real. The quiet room was a reminder of a harsher time, a time when children suffered behind locked doors and silence was the only punishment they knew. In the weeks that followed, I took down the old photos and carefully packed the toys into a box. I cleaned the hidden room as best as I could and left the door open, removing the latch entirely. I wanted to let the air move freely, to stop feeling like the room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I reported the discovery and history to the landlord and city officials. Eventually, the building was inspected and marked for renovations. They promised to turn the hidden room into a small storage closet or maybe even remove the false wall completely. Living there became easier. The sound stopped as the building settled and the walls were repaired. I still think about the children sometimes, about how the past leaves its marks in places we least expect. That old apartment wasn't haunted by ghosts, but by memories. And sometimes, those memories can feel just as loud and real as anything else. I arrived at my friend's house just before sunset. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of day that felt heavy and still. I had never been to this particular place before, even though I'd known my friend for years. The house was older, set back from the street behind thick bushes and tall trees that shadowed the driveway. It looked quiet, almost too quiet for a weekday evening. When my friend opened the door, their face was bright and welcoming, but there was something about the way they glanced over their shoulder as they stepped aside that made me feel a little uneasy. I shrugged it off. Sometimes old houses have that effect. Inside, the air was cooler, smelled faintly of dust, and something else I couldn't place, maybe damp wood or old paint. The floors creaked softly under my feet as I followed my friend through the hallway. It was a narrow house, filled with mismatched furniture and old pictures hanging crookedly on the walls. I noticed how the curtains were drawn tight in every room, blocking out the last of the daylight. Maybe the house was colder than I expected. As we moved from the living room to the kitchen, my eyes caught a door at the end of the hallway. It was smaller than the others, with peeling paint and a rusty handle. What stood out was that the door was locked from the inside. I pointed it out, asking casually why it was locked. My friend's smile tightened just a bit before they said it was an old storage closet. They explained it hadn't been used in years and that the lock was probably stuck. I nodded, but curiosity stuck with me. Why lock a storage closet from the inside? Usually, you'd lock a door from the outside to keep people out, not inside. The thought stayed in my mind as the evening went on. We spent the next few hours talking, laughing quietly in the living room while a low light bulb buzzed overhead. The rest of the house felt silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft scratch of a clock ticking somewhere down the hall. My friend was busy with some work on her laptop, and I leaned back on the worn-out couch, half listening. Just after midnight, I was about to head to the bathroom when I heard it, a soft, persistent scratching coming from that locked door down the hall. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, maybe a loose shutter rattling in the wind. But the noise grew clearer, sharper. It sounded like something was trying to get out. I froze, my heart picking up speed. The scratching was followed by low murmurs, almost like muffled voices. I strained to listen, but they were too quiet to understand. Whoever, or whatever, was behind that door wasn't supposed to be there. I walked closer, the floor cold under my bare feet. The scratching stopped the moment I got near. I pressed my ear to the door, but all I could hear was silence. I called my friend over and asked again what was behind the door. They laughed nervously and said there was nothing there. Maybe rats or some old pipes making noise. I didn't believe them, but I didn't push it. Instead, I decided to watch and wait. The hours crawled by. Every so often, I'd hear the scratching again, sometimes paired with low whispers that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was nothing, that old houses make weird noises. But deep down, I felt wrong. I kept glancing at that door, imagining what could be trapped inside. Around 3 a.m., the noises got worse. The scratching turned to frantic clawing, as if someone or something was desperate to break free. The muffled voices grew louder, sounding frantic, angry maybe, but I still couldn't make out the words. The door shook slightly with every scrape. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a screwdriver from a drawer. I didn't know if it would help, but I had to try to open the door. My hands trembled as I crouched and started working on the rusty lock. It was stuck fast. I pulled harder, but the lock didn't budge. Suddenly, the scratching stopped again. Dead silence. I waited, heart pounding. Then I heard a soft thump on the other side of the door, like something heavy falling. Then another. I stood up and backed away slowly, breathing hard. My friend appeared at the end of the hall, bleary-eyed and pale. They told me to stop messing with the door and try to get some sleep. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the living room, eyes fixed on the hallway. Every few minutes, the noises would start up again, scratching, clawing, thumping. I couldn't explain it, and my friend wouldn't talk about it anymore. They avoided the door, avoided my questions. It was like the door itself was a wall between two worlds. The next morning, I woke to sunlight filtering weakly through the windows. My friend was quiet, almost distant. I asked one last time what was behind the door, but they shook their head and said it was nothing, just old junk. I couldn't accept that. I decided to call a locksmith, even though I wasn't sure if my friend would allow it. I needed to know. I needed to see what was behind that door. After a few tense moments, my friend agreed, but their face was tight with worry. The locksmith arrived mid-morning. He was an older man with steady hands and a calm voice. He inspected the lock and set to work. The whole house seemed to hold its breath as the screwdriver twisted and the lock clicked open. When the door swung wide, I braced myself. Inside was not what I expected. The closet was small, cramped, filled with old boxes, broken furniture, and layers of dust. Nothing alive, no one trapped, no hidden room beyond. But then I noticed it. The floor was scratched up like crazy, that would gouge deep in uneven patterns. And on the far wall, a small vent was covered by a thin metal grate, barely big enough for a hand to fit through. Behind that vent, I could faintly hear the faintest sound, soft scratching, as if someone or something was behind it. We removed the grate carefully. Inside, the wall cavity was dark and empty, but the sound came again, low scratching, faint whispers just beyond reach. It was impossible. There was no way anything could be hiding there. My friend looked at me, pale and tense. We called the police, thinking someone might be trapped or hiding in the walls. They searched the whole house, every inch. Nothing. No one. No signs of entry or hiding. Later, I learned the house had once been part of an old factory site, and the previous owners had sealed off parts of the walls during renovations. The vent was supposed to be an air duct, but it led to a dead end. The strange sounds? Turns out the old pipes in the walls were loose and banging against each other. The scratching was probably small animals trapped in the vents, trying to escape. Still, knowing the explanation didn't ease the feeling of unease that stuck with me long after I left that house. Sometimes, the most ordinary things can feel terrifying when you don't understand them. That locked door, the hidden vent, the scratching in the walls, they were all real. But what scared me the most wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was how close we came to never knowing what was really behind that door, and how sometimes the unknown is a quiet, living thing struggling just out of sight. Driving late at night on a lonely highway is never comfortable. The road stretched ahead in a thin ribbon of silver under the faint glow of my headlights. The sky was heavy with clouds, blocking out any moonlight, leaving everything around me swallowed by darkness. Trees lined both sides of the road like silent sentinels, their branches occasionally brushing the edges of my vision as I passed by. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the tires rolling steadily over the asphalt. I had been on the road for hours, trying to get home after a long day. The highway was mostly empty, which usually made for an easy drive, but at this hour, it also felt eerie. The way the road curved slightly here and there, the shadows twisting in the corners of my eyes, everything was playing tricks on me. I was tired, but there was no place safe to stop, no rest areas or gas stations nearby. Just me, the car, and the night. As I drove, the radio was playing a soft rock station, some slow song I barely recognized. The volume was low. I liked to keep it just loud enough to fill the silence, but not enough to distract me. The warm air from the heater kept the windows from fogging up, and the car's interior felt like a small, protective bubble against the cold world outside. Suddenly, a sharp chill ran down my spine. I felt it before I heard it, a cold breath like someone exhaling right on the back of my neck. I froze for a moment, heart pounding, muscles tense. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror instinctively. The reflection showed the empty back seat. No one was there. My breath hitched. I shook my head slightly, telling myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the air vent had shifted, or some sudden draft sneaked in through the window seals. I tried to focus back on the road, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The cold sensation lingered like a shadow pressing against me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I took a deep breath and glanced back at the mirror again, still empty. The headlights barely reached beyond the road ahead, and the blackness behind the car seemed endless. Suddenly, without warning, the radio switched from music to static. The crackling white noise filled the car, loud and harsh, making me flinch. I reached out with a shaky hand to turn the dial, but before I could, a soft whisper hissed through the speakers, cutting through the static. The voice was barely audible, but clear enough to make me freeze in my seat. It said, "Don't look back." The hairs on my arms rose as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. Was it a trick of the radio? A prank? Or was I losing my mind? The rational part of me screamed to ignore it, but the instinctual part, the part that keeps you alive in moments like this, urged me to keep moving forward without turning around. I forced my eyes back on the road. The beam of my headlights caught a faint flicker in the distance, a shadow moving just at the edge of the trees. It was gone before I could get a clear look. The road seemed to narrow, and the air in the car grew heavier, like the space around me was tightening. The highway was winding now, dipping into shallow valleys and rising over small hills. The sound of the engine filled the silence between my thoughts. My fingers tightened their grip on the wheel, knuckles white. I realized I hadn't blinked in what felt like minutes. The static on the radio lingered, but the whisper didn't come again. I fiddled with the dial, but no matter what I did, the station wouldn't come back. Finally, I hit the power button and shut the radio off. Silence returned, but the tension in the car only grew. The temperature seemed to drop further. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and rolled the window up, even though it was already closed. The feeling on my neck faded, but a new unease settled in. I glanced into the rearview mirror once more. The empty back seat stared back at me, but now the darkness in the glass seemed deeper, more oppressive. I told myself to calm down. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I'd been driving too long and my brain was playing tricks. I thought about pulling over somewhere safe, maybe resting for a while, but no exit signs had appeared for miles. The road ahead was straight for now, and the headlights illuminated the wet sheen of the asphalt from an earlier rain. It glistened under the beams, reflecting the lines painted down the middle. I focused on the road's texture, counting the cracks and patches, trying to keep my mind busy. Then, something caught my eye out of the corner of my vision. Just a brief movement, like a flash of something white by the tree line. I jerked my head quickly to look, but there was nothing there. Only the dense black shadows and the rustling of leaves. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. I tried to slow my breathing, but my heart pounded loud in my ears. I pulled my eyes back to the road and scanned the side mirrors. The left one showed nothing but dark trees and the faint glimmer of distant stars. The right one caught a glimpse of the empty highway stretching behind me. No cars or lights. Then, something unexpected happened. In the right side mirror, a pair of headlights appeared, far behind but growing quickly. They were bright, almost blinding, cutting through the dark like twin lasers. I squinted, trying to judge the distance. The car behind me was moving fast, closing in with alarming speed. I checked my speedometer. I was going about 65 miles per hour, the speed limit for this stretch of highway. The other car was clearly speeding. My heart raced even faster. I considered moving over to the shoulder to let it pass, but the shoulder was narrow and littered with rocks and debris. The headlights came closer, their intensity overwhelming. I felt the wind shift as the other car moved alongside me on the left. I stole a glance, but I couldn't see who was driving. The window was too dark, and the glare of their lights blinded me. The presence unsettled me deeply. This wasn't just a normal car passing by. The way it moved close and fast felt aggressive. I instinctively slowed down a little, hoping to lose it or make it pass. But instead, the car matched my speed, then suddenly swerved right in front of me and slammed on the brakes. I slammed on my own brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. My heart was in my throat. The other car stopped completely, its headlights stabbing into the night. I had to stop too, a distance between us now a few feet. I looked ahead through the windshield. The other car's window rolled down slowly. A man's face appeared, but the glare made it hard to see details. He stared at me with a fixed, cold gaze. I didn't move. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Then the car suddenly sped off, leaving a trail of dust and gravel behind. The sound of its engine faded quickly into the distance. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to calm down. Was that some kind of warning? A threat? I wasn't sure. I forced myself to start the engine again and put the car in gear. The highway ahead looked empty. I pushed the gas pedal gently, letting the car roll forward slowly. My mind replayed the whole event. The breath on my neck, the whisper in the static, the speeding car, the man's cold stare. I decided I needed to get off this highway as soon as possible. I watched carefully for the next exit, a small sign showing the way to a town about 5 miles ahead. The road curved sharply, and I slowed down to take it safely. The exit led to a narrow, two-lane road winding through the forest. The trees closed in tightly, their branches almost brushing the car as I drove. The darkness felt less threatening here, surrounded by nature rather than the endless stretch of highway. After a few miles, I reached a small gas station, its flickering lights a welcome sight. I pulled in and parked near the pumps. The station was quiet, but the bright lights made me feel safer. Inside, a tired-looking clerk nodded at me as I bought a bottle of water. Outside again, I took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. I looked at my car, the quiet machine that had carried me through all that fear. My fingers still trembled slightly as I climbed back in. I started the engine and checked my mirrors one last time. The highway behind me was empty. The feeling of being watched was gone, replaced by a quiet calm. I wasn't sure what had happened back there, but I knew one thing. Sometimes it's better not to look back. I drove on, slower now, keeping to the lit roads and sticking to towns and highways with plenty of cars and people. The night had been long, and the road had taught me a lesson about paying attention, trusting my instincts, and knowing when to get out. The darkness might hide many things, but sometimes the scariest moments come not from what's seen or imagined, but from the weight of silence and the strange things the mind notices when alone in the night. By the time dawn broke, I was safe home, the memory of that night still vivid in my mind. The breath on my neck, the whisper on the radio, the speeding car, all real enough to remind me that sometimes the road at night has its own warnings, and it's best to listen without looking back. I was house sitting for a friend one weekend. It was a quiet neighborhood, mostly older homes with big trees lining the streets, and I liked the calm it brought. The house itself was a two-story with creaky wooden floors and a lot of old furniture that gave it character. I wasn't expecting anything strange, just a few days alone while my friend was out of town. I planned to catch up on some reading, maybe watch a few movies, and enjoy the quiet. The first night, everything felt normal. I settled in the living room with a thick paperback book I'd been meaning to finish. The only light in the room was a small lamp on the side table, casting soft pools of yellow light over the worn couch. Outside, I could hear the occasional car passing by and the wind rustling through the trees. It was late, past midnight, but I felt comfortable wrapped up in the story. I wasn't worried at all. Then, sometime around 1 a.m., I heard it. A soft but definite noise like footsteps coming from upstairs. At first, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. The house was old, and old houses make noises. Floors settle, pipes groan, wind whistles through cracks. But the footsteps were clear, steady, slow. They weren't coming from outside. They were above me, moving across the wooden floor of the second story. I froze for a moment. I wanted to convince myself it was just the house settling, but the sound was too deliberate. Then I called out softly, "Who's there?" My voice sounded strange in the quiet house, a little shaky. No answer, just silence. My heart started to beat faster. I felt a sudden chill, even though the heater was on and the room was warm. The book slipped from my hands. I got up slowly, trying not to make any noise. I didn't want to just stand there and listen anymore. I made my way toward the staircase, careful on the creaky steps. I paused halfway up, listening. The footsteps had stopped. I reached the top landing and looked down the long hallway. The house had 3 bedrooms upstairs and a bathroom at the end of the hall. Everything looked normal. The doors were closed, no sign of anyone or anything. I moved down the hall, checking each door carefully. The first bedroom was empty. I opened the door quietly, peeking inside. The room was dimly lit by the moonlight coming through the window. Nothing was out of place. I closed the door and moved to the next one. Same thing, empty and still. Finally, I reached the bathroom. It was dark inside. I flicked on a light switch, and the harsh fluorescent light buzzed on. The room was clean and empty. I checked the tub and shower, no one hiding there. The sink cabinet was closed, the mirror reflecting the empty room. I felt a little foolish. Maybe it really was the house settling, or a squirrel or something outside on the roof. I started to relax again and was about to head back downstairs when I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were right behind me, coming down the hall. I spun around quickly, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. There was no one there. The hallway was empty. I strained my eyes, looking into the darkness at the end of the hall, but nothing moved. No sound except the faint hum of the heater. I called out again, "Hello? Is someone there?" Still nothing. I swallowed hard and took a step backward, my hands trembling slightly. I knew I should just get out of the house, call my friend, maybe call the police if I had to, but I didn't want to cause a scene or seem crazy. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. I went down the stairs quickly this time, not looking back. When I reached the living room, I locked the door behind me and checked all the windows. They were all closed and locked tight. The curtains were drawn, so no one could see inside. I felt a little safer, but not entirely calm. I sat back down on the couch and tried to read again, but my mind kept wandering back to those footsteps. Every time I heard a creak or a groan from the house, I jumped. I kept glancing at the staircase, expecting to see someone coming down. Hours passed like this. The quiet was unbearable. My eyes burned from trying to focus on the book, but I couldn't concentrate. I thought about going to bed, but the idea of being alone in that house, in that dark room with no idea what was upstairs, terrified me. Around 3 a.m., I decided to check the house again, this time more carefully and thoroughly. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and went upstairs, shining the beam into every corner and closet. I checked under the beds and behind the doors. Every room was empty, exactly as it should be. When I reached the hallway, I noticed something I hadn't before. At the far end, near the bathroom, the carpet looked different, like it had been moved or disturbed recently. I bent down and touched it. The carpet was slightly loose, not fixed to the floor properly. I pulled at the edge and felt something underneath. My heart raced as I lifted the carpet further. Beneath it was a small trapdoor about 2 feet square that I hadn't noticed before because the carpet covered it so well. I felt a sudden rush of cold fear, but also curiosity. I reached for the handle and pulled it up. Underneath was a narrow set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. It smelled musty and old, like a basement or cellar that hadn't been opened in years. I didn't know what I would find down there, but I knew it explained the footsteps, someone or something moving quietly beneath the house. I debated what to do next. Calling the police seemed like the safest choice, but I didn't want to make a big deal if it turned out to be nothing. Still, I couldn't stay in the house without knowing what was there. I decided to take a quick look down the stairs, shining my flashlight into the dark. The stairs creaked under my weight, and I moved slowly, listening for any sounds. At the bottom, I saw a small dirt floor with old boxes and tools scattered around. It looked like an unfinished cellar or crawl space. As I moved forward, the flashlight beam caught something metallic on the rusty lockbox. I stepped closer and examined it, but it was old and locked tight. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise behind me, like breathing or shuffling. I spun around. No one was there. I wanted to run back upstairs, but my legs felt frozen. That's when I realized the door to the trapdoor was starting to close on its own, pushed by a slow but steady force. I lunged forward, grabbing the handle, and held it open with all my strength. The door wouldn't budge. The footsteps from before echoed again, louder this time, but this time they sounded like they were coming from beneath the house, from the cellar itself. I felt completely trapped, scared, and alone. I stayed there for a long moment, frozen with the door in my hands, then heard the front door slam downstairs. That was when I knew someone had been in the house, someone who didn't want to be found. Without thinking, I rushed back up the stairs, locked the trapdoor, and ran to the front door. I grabbed my phone and called my friend. I told them everything, how I'd heard footsteps, found the trapdoor, and the front door slamming. They were shocked and told me to leave immediately and call the police. I packed my things quickly and left the house, looking back only once. The street was empty and quiet again, but I didn't feel safe. I drove to a nearby all-night diner and waited for the police with my friend on the phone, still shaken. When the police came, they searched the house thoroughly. They found evidence someone had been living in the cellar, old blankets, food wrappers, and a makeshift bed hidden from sight. Whoever it was had been sneaking around the house, making the footsteps I heard. They told me this sort of thing wasn't common, but it did happen. People hiding in empty or unattended houses, sometimes for days or weeks. I was lucky to have noticed the trapdoor and called for help when I did. After that night, I never stayed in that house again. I learned that sometimes the scariest things are not ghosts or monsters, but the very real fear of someone invading your space, someone you don't know, quietly watching and waiting in the dark. It was a lesson in paying attention to the little things and trusting your instincts. And no matter how much you want to believe it's just the house making noises, sometimes it's not. It started when the moving truck pulled up next door. I noticed it because our street was usually quiet. People came and went, but not often all in one day like this. The truck was big, old, and rusty, with faded paint peeling off in places. A man wearing a dirty hat and a stained shirt got out. He moved boxes and furniture into the house next to mine. I watched from my window as he worked, but I never saw anyone else with him. Just him. That was the first strange thing. After that day, I never saw the new neighbor outside again. Not once. No matter the time of day, no lights ever flicked on that showed anyone moving around. The curtains were always drawn tightly shut, blocking every glimpse inside. It was like the house was sealed off from the world. At first, I thought maybe the person just kept to themselves, someone shy or private. But the house wasn't empty. Lights would flicker on in random rooms, sometimes, usually late at night or very early in the morning. I figured the person was awake, maybe working odd hours, but never stepping outside. At night, things got worse. I'd be lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I'd start to hear things coming from next door. At first, it was faint, barely audible, soft scratching noises like nails against wood or maybe metal. The sound didn't follow any pattern. Sometimes it came in bursts, sometimes slow and steady. I couldn't tell if it was inside the walls or outside under the porch, but it wasn't normal. It didn't sound like an animal or the wind. Then came the whispers. They were soft, low, almost like someone muttering to themselves or trying to be quiet. I could never make out the words, but the tone was unsettling, almost angry or desperate. The whispers seemed to come from every corner of the house, as if whoever was inside was moving from room to room, but always close to the walls. At times, it felt like the sounds pressed against my own walls, making the air thick and heavy in my bedroom. One night, I got up to look out my window and see if the neighbor's porch light was on. There was no light, but the whispers grew louder for a moment and then stopped all at once, like a switch was flipped. I stared at the dark window across from mine, half expecting to see a shadow move, but nothing did. The house stayed silent, its windows black and empty like eyes without pupils. Weeks went by like this. The scratching and whispers happened nearly every night, always starting around midnight. I started dreading bedtime, knowing I wouldn't get real rest. I tried to explain it to friends, but they said I was imagining things. Maybe I was tired or stressed. Maybe it was just the house settling or rats in the walls. But it didn't feel like any of that. This felt different. I began watching the neighbor's house more carefully during the day, hoping to catch a glimpse of the person inside. Sometimes, I'd see faint movements behind the curtains, a shadow crossing quickly or the brief flicker of a hand. But the curtains never opened. The windows never changed. It was as if the house was alive, breathing in slow, quiet rhythms. Then one afternoon, something happened that I still can't explain. I was watering my front garden when the neighbor's dog. Yes, there was a dog, though I'd never seen it before, slipped out the side gate and started running toward my yard. The dog was small, mangy, with patches of fur missing and a thin body that looked starved. It didn't bark or growl, just ran straight up to me and sat at my feet, looking up with wide, nervous eyes. I looked around for the neighbor, but no one came. I tried calling the dog, but it didn't respond to my voice. After a moment, it just got up and ran back toward the house. That was the only time I saw the dog outside. It didn't come again. I thought about knocking on the neighbor's door to ask about the dog, maybe find out who they were, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way the dog looked at me, like it was scared, like it didn't want to be there. Or maybe it was the way the house seemed to swallow all sound and light whenever I got close. I never found the courage. One night, after the scratching and whispering started again, I couldn't take it. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and quietly crept to my window to peek at the neighbor's house. The street was empty, the moon casting pale light on the quiet homes. I saw the curtains of the living room twitch just a little, like something moved behind them. I held my breath and leaned closer. Through a small crack in the curtains, I saw a figure standing very still. It was facing away from me, looking toward the far wall. The shape was thin, tall, but what caught me off guard was the face, or rather, what should have been a face. It wasn't like any face I had ever seen before. It wasn't just blurred by fog or shadow. It was like a blank blur, a smudge where features should be. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a smooth, featureless surface. The edges were a little fuzzy, as if the face was melting or being erased. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. When I looked back, the figure was gone. For a moment, I froze, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I wanted to scream or run, but I stayed put. I felt a strange coldness, like the air around me was thinner. I didn't sleep that night. I kept staring at the window, half expecting to see the figure return. Days passed, and the noises kept coming. The blank face stayed in my mind, haunting me even when I tried to think of other things. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong next door. Something I couldn't understand, but that felt deeply disturbing. Then one afternoon, I noticed something new. The mailbox next to the house was full of letters and packages that hadn't been picked up. The grass in the front yard was turning brown, the paint on the porch peeling even more. The house looked like it was slowly decaying from the outside in. One morning, I saw a moving van parked down the street. Men were unloading boxes, and I recognized a few neighbors watching with curious eyes. A woman called out that the new neighbor had moved out, suddenly, without any warning or explanation. No one knew where the person had gone. After they left, the house sat empty for a few days. The strange noises stopped. The whispers and scratching vanished like they were never there. The curtains stayed closed, but the windows no longer flickered with light. It looked lifeless, just an empty shell waiting for someone new. The only thing left behind was the dog. It stayed by the front steps, thin and scared, its eyes darting nervously at every noise. Eventually, one of the neighbors took it in. Sometimes when I walk past that house, I look up at the window where I saw that blank face one last time. The house feels heavy, like it's holding on to secrets it will never share. The way the paint peels and the grass dies makes me think it's a place that doesn't want to be disturbed. I never found out who lived there, what they were doing inside that house, or why the noises filled the night. But I know one thing for sure. Sometimes people don't want to be seen. Sometimes they hide behind walls and whispers, and when you do catch a glimpse, it's nothing like what you expect. That blank face, that silence behind closed curtains, it's a memory I can't forget. And I'm glad I never tried to open that door, because some mysteries are better left alone. Camping alone had always been something I wanted to try. I like the idea of being out in the woods with nothing but nature and myself. No noise from cars or people, just the sound of the wind through the trees and maybe some wildlife. So one weekend, I packed up my gear and drove out to a small forested area I'd found on a map. It was a little off the beaten path, not a popular campground, but it looked peaceful enough. I was confident I could handle a night out there by myself. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun still warm but already sinking low. The dirt road I took was bumpy and narrow, lined with tall pines and oaks. I parked my car near a clearing I'd scouted earlier that day. The spot was perfect, a flat patch of ground surrounded by trees, with a small creek running just a few yards away. I set up my tent carefully, hammering the stakes in tight, then arranged my sleeping bag and gear inside. I made a small fire pit and gathered some dry wood. The smell of pine and earth filled the air. The forest was quiet, not completely silent, of course. There was the occasional rustle of leaves, the chirp of birds settling down for the night, the distant call of a crow or two. I liked this quiet. I felt a little thrill being out here on my own, but I wasn't scared yet. I built a small fire and sat near it, watching the flames flicker and listening to the soft crackle. I ate a simple dinner for my pack, some canned chili and crackers, and drank some water. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky darkened fast. The woods turned dim, shadows stretching out between the trees. I turned on my flashlight and zipped to my jacket. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun was gone. I tried to enjoy the stillness, but felt my mind starting to wander, thinking about all the stories people tell about being alone in the woods at night. I told myself those were just stories, nothing to worry about. Around 10 p.m., I decided to do one last walk before bed. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the path a little way. The beam of light moved over the trunks and bushes, and I could hear the creek babbling nearby. The cool air smelled damp and fresh. I wasn't far from camp, maybe 100 yards, when I suddenly heard it. It was faint at first, soft, almost like the wind blowing through the leaves. But then I realized it wasn't the wind. Someone was whispering my name. At first, I thought it might be my imagination. I paused and listened carefully, but there was again a soft, low whisper repeating my name over and over, barely louder than a breath. The sound seemed to be coming from just beyond the trees, a few yards into the dark forest. I stood frozen, my heart beating faster. I called out sharply, "Who's there?" but got no reply. The whispering didn't stop. Instead, it grew louder, clearer. My name, again and again, like someone just out of sight, moving closer through the trees. My skin prickled, and a cold sweat broke out on my neck. I wanted to believe it was some animal or the wind, but the voice was too distinct, too deliberate. I started walking back toward my campsite, trying to keep calm, telling myself it was probably some other camper playing a prank or someone lost in the woods. I shouted again, louder this time, "Hey, I'm alone here." Still no answer. The whispering followed me, always just beyond the edge of the light, coming from the shadows between the trees. My pace quickened. The whispers grew louder, and now I could almost feel someone moving behind me, pushing through the brush, branches snapping underfoot. My breath came faster, and I started to run. The forest around me felt alive, pressing in from all sides, the dark thick and heavy. I didn't dare look back. The thought of what might be chasing me was worse than any sight. The sound of my name, whispered again and again, chased me faster than I could run, until I burst through the trees and saw the faint glow of my car's taillights ahead. I sprinted toward it, my hands fumbling with the keys, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I got inside, locked the doors, and sat there shaking for a long time. The whispering stopped the moment I closed the door, as if it was tied to the open woods. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the car running, the headlights on, and stared out into the black trees, waiting for dawn. The next morning, I packed up and left immediately. I didn't stop to explore or enjoy the forest anymore. The peaceful solitude I wanted had turned into something else, a raw fear I couldn't shake. After that night, I never camped alone again, and I never forgot how real and close that whispering felt, like someone was right there, watching me, calling me from the dark. I remember that night clearly, even though it was months ago now. It wasn't the kind of night that started out strange or scary, just a normal, quiet evening after a long day. I had been home alone because my partner was working a late shift, and I was just winding down, getting ready for bed. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that fills a place when no one's moving around, just stillness hanging heavy in the air. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, the harsh white light overhead buzzing softly, the only noise besides the faint sound of water dripping from the faucet. I looked up into the mirror while rinsing my mouth, and something made me freeze. At first, it was just a vague feeling like a chill running down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder quickly, a little annoyed at myself for being jumpy, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway behind me, dim and dark because I hadn't turned on the bathroom light outside yet. Then my eyes caught it, or rather, caught something in the mirror. Behind me in the reflection, I saw a shadow. It was vague, like a silhouette, but definitely shaped like a person standing there. I blinked hard, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks or I was seeing a trick of the light. I turned around fast, heart thumping in my chest, but the hallway was empty. No one, nothing. I checked the bathroom again, hoping it was just a shadow cast by something, but there was nothing. No coat hanging, no broom, no person. The shadow in the mirror didn't disappear though. It stayed there, just standing still behind me. I stared into the mirror again, and the shadow stayed, but I could only see it in the reflection. When I looked directly behind me, it was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep well. My mind kept going back to the mirror, the shadow, how impossible it seemed, but how real it felt at the same time. I kept imagining it moving closer, watching me. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with dark shapes and shifting figures I couldn't quite make out. The next morning, everything looked normal in the daylight. I went to the bathroom, shook off the bad feeling from the night, and went about brushing my teeth again. But when I looked up at the mirror, the shadow was there again. This time, it wasn't just standing quietly behind me. It was smiling. A slow, chilling smile. Not a friendly one, not natural, just a cold, eerie grin that spread across that dark face in the mirror. I didn't turn around immediately. Something about that smile held me frozen. It felt deliberate, like it was waiting for me to react. The smile didn't reach any eyes because there were none, just darkness where a face should have been. My heart pounded harder. It wasn't a reflection of me anymore. It was something else, something that was using the mirror to show itself. I turned slowly around, expecting to see someone, anyone, but again, no one was there. The hallway was still empty, the house still quiet. Nothing to explain the smile or the shadow. After that, I stayed out of the bathroom for a long time. I avoided looking in mirrors at all, even small ones in my bedroom or the ones in the hallway. The feeling that something was watching me, just out of sight, stayed with me all day. It was like the shadow had followed me out of the bathroom and was now somewhere in the house. Over the next few days, I became more alert to every sound and movement. I'd catch glimpses of shadows in corners of my vision or reflections in windows that didn't match anything behind me. The air in the house felt heavier, colder. My dog, usually calm, started acting nervous, growling softly at nothing I could see. It wasn't a feeling of ghosts or magic, just something wrong. I started thinking about what could cause this. Maybe my mind was tricking me after being alone so much. Maybe it was exhaustion or stress making me see things. But the smile, that was the thing I couldn't ignore. No normal stress makes you see a shadow smile in your mirror. I decided to check everything about the bathroom mirror. I wanted to see if it was damaged, warped, or somehow creating strange reflections. The mirror was old, but nothing unusual. Just a standard rectangular mirror mounted on the wall. I even cleaned it thoroughly, hoping that maybe some smudge or dirt was casting shapes. But no matter how clean it was, the shadow and the smile kept showing up in the reflection. One evening, I stayed late in the bathroom, watching the mirror closely. I wanted to catch the moment it appeared, to see if it changed or moved. The room was dark except for a small nightlight. For almost an hour, nothing happened. Then slowly, the shadow began to appear again, fading in a shape like smoke filling glass. It took form behind me, not in the room, but only in the mirror's reflection. Then the smile spread across its face. This time, it felt different, like it was trying to tell me something without words. I looked directly into the mirror and back at the empty room behind me again and again, trying to understand. I noticed something odd. The shadow's movements were linked to mine, but slightly delayed, as if the reflection was out of sync with reality. It moved when I moved, but not exactly at the same time, like a slow echo. It was then I realized the problem wasn't a shadow or a ghost. It was a trick in the mirror itself. Not supernatural, but something far more disturbing and real. The mirror wasn't just reflecting me. It was showing a distorted version of reality. My reflection was warped in a way that it created a dark shape behind me, a copy that could do things I didn't. I did some research on the mirror. It was a secondhand piece I had bought at a flea market years ago. Nothing about it said it was dangerous, but old mirrors can have strange properties. Sometimes the glass gets worn or scratched, creating illusions. But this was different. This was like a dark copy of me existed just inside the glass. Days passed, and I became obsessed with the mirror. I tried covering it with a cloth, but then I had bad dreams. Dreams where my reflection stepped out of the mirror and took over my life, leaving me trapped behind the glass. I'd wake up sweaty and panicked. Eventually, I had to face it. I took the mirror down from the bathroom wall one afternoon. It was heavy and awkward, the glass cold in my hands. I placed it face down on the floor in the garage, away from the house. For the first time in weeks, I felt some relief. But the next morning, when I went to get the mirror and bring it outside for disposal, I paused. I looked at the glass surface, still facing down. The smooth surface suddenly reflected a faint image of the garage behind me. And in that reflection, I saw the shadow standing again. It was still there, smiling. It was no longer just the bathroom mirror or my imagination. Somehow, that shadow had latched onto me through the mirror's reflection, and it wasn't going away. At that point, I had to accept something hard. The mirror wasn't just glass and wood. It was a doorway of sorts, not to ghosts or magic, but to a psychological trap that played with my mind. It reflected a part of me I couldn't control, a darker side that lived only in reflections and shadows. I decided to get rid of it completely. I wrapped it carefully in an old blanket and drove out to the river nearby. In the quiet of early morning, I threw the mirror into the deep water. It sank slowly out of sight, swallowed by the dark current. When I went back home, the house felt lighter. The shadow never appeared again in any mirror or window. My reflection looked normal once more, matching every move and smile exactly. It wasn't a ghost or a haunting. It was something more unsettling, a trick of the mind, a crack in perception that turned the simplest thing, a mirror, into a source of fear. The experience taught me how fragile our sense of reality can be, how easily our eyes can deceive us, and how sometimes the scariest things aren't monsters, but the parts of ourselves hidden just beneath the surface. Even now, I can't look at a mirror without a little pause, but I've learned to trust what I see and to keep the shadows where they belong, behind me, out of sight. I was home alone late at night. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors settling. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the window panes and making the shadows of the trees dance across the walls. It was the kind of night that made the silence feel heavier, as if the dark was waiting for something. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the eerie feeling that had settled in my chest. The whole day had been normal: work, dinner, some TV. But now, as the clock passed midnight, I couldn't shake the unease. Suddenly, my phone rang. The screen showed no caller ID, just the words "unknown number." I hesitated for a moment, fingers hovering over the screen. Usually, I'd ignore calls like this, but something made me answer. I picked up. At first, nothing, just silence. Then, very faint, heavy breathing. It was slow and uneven, like someone struggling to control it or try not to make noise. I held the phone tighter, tried to listen, but there was no other sound. No voice, no movement, just that unsettling breathing. I hung up quickly and sat there, heart pounding. Maybe it was a prank call or someone messing around. Still, I felt my skin crawl. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just some bored person. But the phone rang again. The screen was still blank, no caller ID. My hand shook a little as I answered. This time I whispered, "Who is this?" A voice, low and barely audible, came through the line. "I'm outside." I froze. The words were so quiet that I had to lean in closer to the phone just to make sure I heard correctly. My mind raced. My eyes darted toward the front window. I couldn't see anything, just the dark yard and the shifting shadows from the trees. My heart felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. I stood up slowly and moved toward the window. The street was deserted, and the yard was empty. The street lamp at the end of the block flickered, casting long, broken shadows. There was no one there, but the voice on the phone said otherwise. I locked the door again, double-checked every window and door in the house. I didn't have any weapons or anything to protect myself with, just my phone and a kitchen knife that was too small to really defend me. I called the police and waited on the line, but no one came right away. It was late, and they told me it might take some time. While waiting, I kept my eyes peeled on the windows. I could hear the wind outside, the leaves scraping against the siding. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow move near the back door, but when I looked again, it was gone. The call stopped. After that second one, the phone never rang again. I sat there for hours, glued to the windows, unable to sleep. When morning came, I stepped outside carefully and looked around. No footprints in the yard, no signs that anyone had been there. But my gut told me I wasn't alone last night. From then on, I changed the locks, installed security cameras, and never stayed home alone after dark. That night stayed with me, not because of ghosts or monsters, but because someone had been out there, watching, waiting, and letting me know they could be there anytime they wanted. The silence of the house after that call was never the same again. The sun was already sinking low behind the trees when I started to feel it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from behind me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the usual creaking of the forest settling in the early evening. But then I heard again, unmistakable this time, footsteps, soft, deliberate, and steady. I was hiking alone on a remote trail deep in the woods, far from any road or cell service, and the sound wasn't just some animal or the wind. It was something else. I paused and stood still, trying to convince myself it was just another hiker or a jogger who had been behind me on the trail all along. I listened hard, the forest around me alive with the sound of rustling leaves and birds settling for the night. The footsteps behind me stopped the moment I stopped. I held my breath, frozen, waiting to hear if they'd start up again. They didn't. After a minute or two, I figured it was just a coincidence or maybe a hiker who had changed direction or stopped somewhere off the trail. I began walking again, slow and steady, keeping my eyes glued to the path ahead. But a few steps in, the footsteps returned, matching my pace exactly, a steady, muffled thump, thump, thump behind me. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. It was the most unnerving thing I'd ever experienced in the woods. I told myself to stay calm. There could be a reason, a hunter, another hiker, someone just trying to keep the same pace, but invisible from the angle I was seeing. The trail was narrow, lined with thick bushes and trees, so maybe they were just out of sight. I decided to speed up. I started jogging, the crunch of leaves under my boots louder now, mixing with the steady sound of the footsteps behind me. They didn't falter or slow down. They matched my speed perfectly, right behind me, no matter how fast I moved. My heart started pounding hard, but I forced myself to keep going. I couldn't let panic take over. After a few hundred yards, I dared to glance back. The path curved slightly, and I could see through the thinning trees. But there was nothing there. No person, no animal, no movement at all. Just the usual shadows and the swaying branches in the wind. The footsteps didn't stop, though. I could still hear them, loud and clear, right behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks, chest heaving. The footsteps stopped too, silent again. I swallowed hard and looked back once more, scanning every inch of the trail. The woods were empty, nothing but trees and underbrush. That's when I noticed something else, something I hadn't paid attention to before. The forest was too quiet. Normally, at this time of day, the woods were full of noises, birds calling out their last songs before nightfall, squirrels rustling in the leaves, insects buzzing around the last light of the sun. But now, everything was unnaturally still. No birds, no bugs, no movement at all. I shivered, though the air was still warm. Something about that silence made the hairs on my neck stand up. I told myself it was time to get out. I couldn't stay here. The sun was almost gone, and I was alone. No cell signal. No one knew where I was. I turned around and started running, the footsteps following me like a shadow glued to my heels. I sprinted, dodging branches and jumping over roots. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for relief, but I couldn't stop. Every time I stopped, the footsteps stopped. Every time I moved, they moved. After what felt like forever, I burst out of the dense trees onto a small dirt road I hadn't noticed on the map. The footsteps continued for a few more steps and then stopped suddenly when I reached the edge of the road. I stopped and listened, my whole body trembling. Nothing. I looked behind me into the forest, but no one was there. I wanted to believe I'd escaped whatever was following me, but then I noticed the footprints. They weren't animal prints. They were human, and they weren't fresh. They were old, cracked, and partially covered with leaves and dirt, like someone had walked through here long ago, maybe days before. I followed them with my eyes, back into the trees, where they faded away under thick moss and fallen branches. I stood there, heart still pounding, trying to piece together what I'd just experienced. The footsteps behind me, were they mine? The pace had matched mine so perfectly, it was like someone was stepping in my footprints. Maybe it was an echo of my own steps, amplified by the quiet forest floor. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks in the fading light. I looked down at my boots, then back toward the trail I had come from. The forest was still silent. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the last glimmers of orange and red through the trees. I took a deep breath and started walking toward my car, the dirt road stretching out before me. The footsteps never returned, but I never forgot the feeling of being followed by something I couldn't see. Something that moved exactly like me, but wasn't there. And sometimes, when I hike alone, I wonder if the woods remember my footsteps too. I was driving home late one night on a quiet country road. The kind of road where there's barely any light except for your headlights cutting through the thick dark. The trees on both sides were tall and dense, blocking out what little moonlight there was. It felt like the road went on forever, winding through the countryside, with no other cars or houses in sight for miles. The air was cool, and the windows were rolled down just a crack so I could hear the night sounds, crickets, the occasional rustle in the bushes, and the hum of the tires on the asphalt. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to get home, put on some coffee, and finally relax. The road was empty, peaceful even, but something about that peace always makes you a little uneasy when you're alone at night. I was watching the road carefully, my eyes darting between the mirrors and the street ahead. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, just a shadow or a trick of the light. But there she was, standing by the side of the road, near a bend. A woman, just standing there with her thumb out, trying to hitch a ride. She looked tired and maybe a little cold, dressed in dark clothes that blended into the night. The only thing that stood out was her pale face, lit slightly by the passing car's headlights as I slowed down. I didn't have to think about it twice. I pulled over a little, enough so she could get in safely. She didn't say much, just slid into the passenger seat quietly. I noticed she smelled faintly like cigarette smoke mixed with something else, maybe rain on dirt or a faint scent of old perfume. Her hands were cold when she briefly touched the door handle. I glanced over, but she kept her eyes on the road ahead, expression blank. We started driving again. The silence between us was thick. It felt natural, though. Sometimes people just don't want to talk. I kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the door. The streetlights were far apart now, so the road was mostly lit by my headlights, the yellow glow fading into blackness at the edges. After a few minutes, I figured I should ask where she wanted to go. When I did, she answered simply, near the old cemetery. That struck me as strange. The old cemetery was just a few miles up ahead, a place most people avoided after dark because it was isolated and kind of eerie. I didn't say anything, just nodded and kept driving. The road to the cemetery was rougher, narrower. Trees leaned over the road, their branches scraping the roof of my car. The wind picked up and made a low moaning sound through the leaves. I noticed her hands now resting in her lap, fingers nervously tapping against each other. She didn't look at me or the window, just stared straight ahead. When we reached the turnoff to the cemetery, I slowed the car. There were no streetlights here, just the moon, barely visible behind a patch of clouds, casting a dim, gray light over the cracked pavement and overgrown grass. The gates to the cemetery were old iron bars, half rusted and hanging unevenly on their hinges. I glanced over to tell her we had arrived, but the seat was empty. No sound, no movement, just an empty seat and a cold breeze that slipped in through the cracked window. The door was still locked, and the car was warm from the heater. I looked around quickly, heart picking up its pace. There was no sign of her anywhere, not at the gate, not along the road. Just silence and the faint rustling of dry leaves in the wind. I checked my phone, hoping she might have texted or called, but there was no signal out here. I sat still for a moment, eyes scanning the dark edges of the road, but the trees were still, the night quiet except for the wind. The longer I sat there, the heavier the air felt. That's when I noticed the faint smell, the same faint perfume mixed with cigarette smoke that had been in the car. It was coming from the passenger seat, like she had just vanished in a thin air. I shivered and locked the doors again. I decided not to get out of the car. Something about the place felt wrong, like the silence was too deep, and the darkness held more than just shadows. I started driving again, slowly at first, then picking up speed. When I reached the main road, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The empty road stretched behind me, and the moon was peeking out from behind the clouds, but there was no sign of her. That night stayed with me. I told myself it was just someone who got cold and left the car when I wasn't looking, or maybe I was tired and imagining things. But there was no sign of her anywhere when I went back the next day. No footprints, no abandoned car. Just the old cemetery, quiet as ever, and a cold breeze that seemed to whisper when the wind blew through the trees. Sometimes, when I'm driving that road at night, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, a movement that disappears before I can turn to see it. And every time, I think about that woman who got in my car and then vanished like she was never there at all.